Okay, so this is the Bible study for 2 Samuel chapter 19, verses 9 through 43. And the text says, throughout the tribes of Israel, all the people were arguing among themselves, saying, the king delivered us from the hand of our enemies. He is the one who rescued us from the hand of the Philistines. But now he has fled the country to escape from Absalom, and Absalom, who we anointed ruler over us, has died in battle. So why do you say nothing about bringing the king back? King David sent this message to Zadok and Abiathar the priest. Ask the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to bring the king back to his palace? Since what is being said throughout Israel has reached the king at his quarters, you are my relatives, my own flesh and blood. So why should you be the last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, are you not my own flesh and blood? May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you are not the commander of my army for life in place of Joab. He won over the hearts of the men of Judah so that they were all of one mind. They sent word to the king, return, you and all your men. Then the king returned and went as far as the Jordan. Now the men of Judah had come to Gilgal to go out and meet the king and bring him across the Jordan. Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite from Bahurim, hurried down with the men of Judah to meet King David. With him were 1,000 Benjamites, along with Ziba, the steward of Saul's household, and his 15 sons and 20 servants. They rushed to the Jordan where the king was. They crossed at the ford to take the king's household over and to do whatever he wished. When Shimei, son of Gera, crossed the Jordan, he fell prostrate before the king and said to him, may my lord not hold me guilty. Do not remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. May the king put it out of his mind, for I, your servant, know that I have sinned. But today I have come here as the first from the tribes of Joseph to come down and meet my lord the king. Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and said, shouldn't Shimei be put to death for this? He cursed the Lord's anointed. David replied, what does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? What right do you have to interfere? Should anyone be put to death in Israel today? Don't I know that today I am king over Israel? So the king said to Shimei, you shall not die, and the king promised him on oath. Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, also went down to meet the king. He had not taken care of his feet or trimmed his mustache or washed his clothes from the day the king left until the day he returned safely. When he came from Jerusalem to meet the king asked him, why didn't you go with me, Mephibosheth? He said, my lord the king, since I, your servant, am lame, I said, I will have my donkey saddled and I will ride it, so I can go with the king. But Ziba, my servant, betrayed me, and he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. My lord the king is like an angel of God, so do whatever you wish. All my grandfather's descendants deserve nothing but death from my lord the king, but you gave your servant a place among those who eat at your table. So what right do I have to make any more appeals to the king? The king said to him, why say more? I order you and Ziba to divide the land. Mephibosheth said to the king, let him take everything, now that my lord the king, has returned home safely. Barzillai the Gileadite also came down from Rogelim to cross the Jordan with the king and send him on his way from there. Now Barzillai was very old, 80 years of age. He had provided for the king during his stay in Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. The king said to Barzillai, cross over with me and stay with me in Jerusalem, and I will provide for you. But Barzillai answered the king, how many more years will I live that I should go up to Jerusalem with the king? I am now 80 years old. Can I tell the difference between what is enjoyable and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats and drinks? Can I still hear the voices of male and female singers? Why should your servant be an added burden to the Lord, my lord the king? Your servant will cross over the Jordan with the king for a short distance. But why should the king reward me in this way? Let your servant return, that I may die in my own town, near the tomb of my father and mother. But here is your servant Kimham. Let him cross over with my lord the king. Do for him whatever you wish. The king said, Kimham shall cross over with me, and I will do for him whatever you wish, and anything you desire from me I will do for you. So all the people crossed the Jordan, and then the king crossed over. The king kissed Barzillai and bid him farewell, and Barzillai returned home. When the king crossed over to Gilgal, Kimham crossed with him. All the troops of Judah and half the troops of Israel had taken the king over. Soon all the men of Israel were coming to the king and saying to him, Why did our brothers, the men of Judah, steal the king away and bring him and his household across the Jordan together with all his men? All the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, We did this because the king is closely related to us. Why are you angry about it? Have we eaten any of the king's provisions? Have we taken anything for ourselves? Then the men of Israel answered the men of Judah, We have 10 shares in the king, so we have a greater claim on David than you have. Why then do you treat us with contempt? Weren't we the first to speak of bringing back our king? But the men of Judah pressed their claims even more forcefully than the men of Israel. And we'll stop there because that's just about enough. So remember that you can download a PDF copy of this Bible study to follow along with us at www.abqnaz.org/alive. And it is the Bible study for 2 Samuel 19:9 through 43. So this is a very interesting text because David is coming back, and there seems to be a lot of symbolism and in who crosses over with him and who sort of declares themselves to be with him, and how people respond who have not been with him. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. Number one says, what happened in our text last week? So remember last week, there's a blank line here. So you have to actually remember there's no list of question or list of possible answers like usual. Catch you off guard a little bit. Remember that last week, Absalom was defeated, and then the king was weeping for Absalom. So that was really what we talked about last week specifically, is the king was weeping for Absalom, and David mourned, and Joab confronted him. So that was because all the people were sneaking back into the city, and maybe we forget, but it's good to remember that the city they were sneaking back into was not Jerusalem, obviously, because they're returning to Jerusalem this week. The city was the city nearest where the battle went, where David stayed while the men were in battle. And remember, they said, we don't want you to march out with us. So he went to the nearest city there, and that was kind of his home base. And when his army came back, they were sneaking back in like they were ashamed because Absalom was killed and the king was weeping. He wasn't celebrating, so it wasn't like he was proud of this victory. And so it felt like he wasn't happy with them. So they were really also not celebrating. And Joab kind of chastises him. You would rather we have died than Absalom, who was opposing you. So that's what we talked about last week primarily. Number two says, what, according to 19:9 and 10, were people saying among the tribes of Israel? So now there's this whispering. So now David has defeated Absalom. There is no king in Jerusalem. David is the king, presumably, but he has not been brought back to Jerusalem. He's not been affirmed or anointed as the king other than he had been before. He was always sort of the king until somebody decided Absalom was the king, and Absalom kind of worked that out so that they would anoint him king. But when he declared himself king, David left, and David is sort of in exile. But David has won the battle against Absalom, and yet he's still not in Jerusalem reigning as king. So what they're whispering is they're saying that the king, the king that's still alive, the king, the only one that we have right now anointed, otherwise, who else is going to be king? He delivered us from our enemies. He rescued us from the hands of the Philistines. Remember, that's what Saul was supposed to do, but he didn't. And so David took on that task and really did it. And he fled the country to escape Absalom. Um, but Absalom died in battle. So why aren't we bringing back King David? So they're whispering it. Nobody's doing it, but they're sort of whispering, why isn't the king back in Jerusalem now? Isn't he the rightful king? Isn't he the one? Absalom sure was anointed, but he's gone. Who else are we going to name king? Shouldn't it be David, who has already done all this for us, who never should have not been king, probably? And so these are the kind of whispers. Everybody thinks it, but nobody's doing anything about it, it seems. So number 3 says, what did David do in 19:11 through 13? A, he sent a message to the elders of Judah showing he knew what everybody was saying. So he says, let me just go ahead. B, he asked the tribe of Judah why they wouldn't bring him back since they were his own family. That's true. C, he offered to make Amasa the leader of Absalom's army, the commander of his own army in place of Joab. So what's going on is he sends, he remember that David was king of Judah even before he was king of all Israel, because Judah is his tribe, his family. um Now when I say this, there were 12 tribes, and generally the way it got split out was 10 and 2 later on, when the under Solomon's son, Rehoboam and Jeroboam. One of them was his son, the other was not. I can always never remember which one's which, honestly. But the kingdom split, and there was two, and there was 10. And so the 2 tribes and 10 tribes, and so usually the 2 tribes was named Judah, even though both the tribes weren't Judah, they were named Judah, and the 10 was named Israel, or sometimes Ephraim, after, I think, the oldest son of those tribes. But um anyway, so there's this split, and that's important to understand. um Judah um is the one that came out to meet him, ultimately, but he sent this message to Judah saying, everybody in Israel saying this, why are you not doing something about it? You're my family, you're the ones that I was king over first. And of course there's this complexity, because Absalom was also in the same tribe as David. And so they, Amasa, who he chose to be the leader of the army. Perhaps Amasa was holding some leadership among Israel at the time. Sometimes that happened. Remember the sway that Abner held, um, um, prior to David becoming king. It's not unusual for that military leader to hold a lot of sway. And so then we hear David saying, maybe I put Amasa as the leader of my army in place of Joab. He's been a solid military leader. He is my own family also, after all. Um, and and so we see him almost sounding like he's negotiating a little bit, for them to be on his side and to bring him back. And so that's ultimately what happens. Number 4 says, how, according to 19:14 and 15, did the men of Judah respond? It says he won the hearts of the men of Judah, so they were all of one mind. They sent word to the king, return you and all your men. Then the king returned and went as far as the Jordan. So they responded positively. They said, yes, you're right, we should be the ones, come on back. And then David came as far as the Jordan River, which is basically sort of the border. He came as far as, even when that was not the actual border of Israel, it was always sort of a symbolic border of Israel. You remember that they crossed when they were coming in, but some of the tribes settled on the other side. They came in and took the land with Joshua, and then they went back and settled on the other side. So it wasn't always the actual border of Israel, but it was sort of always a symbolic border of Israel. And so he came that far, and then he stopped and waited for them to come out to meet him. So number 5 says, what happened when the men of Judah went out to meet David and bring him back across the Jordan, according to 10:15b through 20. A, Shimei went with him and took 1,000 Benjamites. Remember Shimei? He was a big deal a little while ago in how he responded when David was leaving. B, Ziba, the steward of Saul's household, who had taken care of Mephibosheth, was also there. That's sort of a double meaning there, because he was the steward who was taking care of all of Saul's household and making sure Mephibosheth was provided for. And yet he had sort of taken care of him by, in the end, when David left, by lying about him and getting all his stuff and taking care of him, got him out of the picture a little bit. And so then, see, when Shimei crossed the Jordan, he fell prostrate before the king and asked that David not remember the wrong that Shimei had done. How embarrassing would it be to get all cocky because David's leaving and think that now your tribe is going to rule again, and then that never happens, and David comes back. Now, granted, Absalom was not of his tribe either, but surely he thought Absalom was a weaker leader, and maybe his tribe would take over again, or something like that, or very least he just was rubbing it in David's face what happened with his own son. And so then now David's coming back, and here is Shimei having to fall, uh, humble himself before David, because otherwise the king that he was kicking rocks on and throwing rocks at is now king again, and this does not spell good things for him. So he's the first to get out there, and he brings a bunch of Benjamite soldiers. Yeah, hey, we're on board with you too. And they go out there to meet him, and he falls prostrate before the king. So then number 6, what did Abishai say according to 19:21? It says, then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said, shouldn't Shimei be put to death for this? He cursed the Lord's anointed. So Abishai, one of the military leaders for David, if I remember right, the one who wanted to kill Shimei at the beginning, when this was happened, says again, he needs to be put to death. This is what he deserves for what he has done. And number 7 says, what did David do according to 19:22 and 23? David replied, what does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? What right do you have to interfere? Should anyone to be put to death in Israel today? Don't I know that today I am king over Israel? So the king said to Shimei, you shall not die. And the king promised on oath. So it's interesting here because the military leaders, are big on justice, are big on what he deserves, and we're going to make sure that he gets what he deserves. And um, that's their way of thinking. That's what they want to happen. That's, if they have influence, that's what they're going to make sure happens. And yet David, by the way, David also at one point was military leader. He's been a very strong military leader even as king. And he comes and he says, no, today's not the day for somebody to die. I'm being brought back as king, so now I'm king. It's insecurity. If I didn't feel strong in my position as king, that's what would make me feel like I have to strike down those who have opposed me. Now, he doesn't say all that, but this is a truth that we need to understand, is the thing that makes us seek justice rather than mercy is often our own insecurity. We feel like we have to seek justice because it's what somebody deserves, and that lifts us up if they're torn down. And David does not have that problem. David says, "Don't I know that I'm king? I'm not insecure today, so I don't have to strike somebody down. I can show mercy." And let me just say this. This is an important concept, and I do believe it's right here. He's the fact that he says, "Don't I know that I'm king today?" says, I don't have to be insecure today. That's what he's really saying. So this is a leadership principle that David is modeling leadership for us, but because he's saying, I don't have to strike down those who oppose me. I can show mercy for those who oppose me. And that actually makes me a greater leader than if I was insecure and felt like I had to strike down everyone who opposed me. And I think it's important because we may not be killing our enemies, and there may not be people cursing us quite like Shimei did David. But in leadership, we have this tendency to deal more harshly and insist on justice more strongly when we are insecure. And so it's our I could say emotional health that allows us to be merciful. But I would say even more than that, our spiritual health, because we may not have confidence in ourselves, but can we have confidence in God and who He is in us, so that we don't have to seek justice. And when I say God calls us to seek justice, let me clarify, for others who are oppressed. We don't have to seek justice for ourselves, that I was wrong, so I'm going to slap down those who wronged me. We only would do that if we need that to secure our own position before God. But if we recognize who we are in Christ, who we are before God, then we can show mercy because we don't have that insecurity, because we have confidence in Him. And we see that in Jesus, and we see that in David, and it's one of the hardest things for us to do. And honestly, I think that's because we're not comfortable in who we are in Christ. We're not confident that God has us taken care of. So we feel like we need to sort of ensure justice and sort of punishment for those who have wronged us. And I just want to kind of reaffirm that what David is doing here should be a model for us. And I believe that Jesus followed in that. And well, maybe Jesus modeled it and David followed in it because, uh, Jesus says that, Jesus, the Son of God was from eternity. Even though Jesus came to earth at a time, he was made flesh at a specific time in history that came after David, yet he was ultimately before David, and that's scriptural too. Um, so, so ultimately, this is modeled by Jesus, modeled by David, and the question is, Is that a model that we are following, or is our insecurity causing us to seek justice for those who have wronged us or have done wrong and that's affected us? And Man, I think honestly, I think by nature as humans, we are poor leaders. And the reason is by nature as humans, we have this tendency to be selfish and to seek fairness and justice for us, and instead of applying mercy. So David applies mercy, and the person that was sort of demanding justice here, he says, this is none of your business. You're not in charge of this. You're all this ego and whatever you're doing right here, I don't need all that. I'm going to make the right decision for leadership and not be influenced by the guy that wants to puff up his chest here. And so honestly, in this is a constant in the church, this kind of wrestling in my life. Honestly, when I was on staff in the church, I was the one like, why don't we do something about that? That's not right. Somebody should. And talking to the pastor about that, and he was always the one that tried to teach me mercy. And then when I became the leader, I've always had an Abishai in my life, sometimes multiple. Somebody that says, well, that's not right. You need to fix that. You should kill him. You should, they're not telling me to kill people, but you should straighten that person out. You need to fix that person that's really worried about fixing everybody else. And I've really tried to be the one who follows the footsteps of David and of Jesus, and seeks mercy instead of justice for me, or um, just giving people another chance. I had a conversation with somebody in the church about this, in the last few weeks, and I think some of our core team and our staff are also learning that we're the people that um, need to be the people of mercy, and they have a few Abishais too in their lives. I think sometimes that say this is what you should be doing, this is how you should be correcting things, and it's interesting how this is a constant dynamic in the world, I think, but it's probably more noticeable in the church because we are supposed to be a people of mercy, and in the world, those people that are seeking justice and this, punish the people that need to be punished, probably have their way. And so it's much more common for it to be a wrestling in the church, because there's more likely to be somebody that's saying, like David, this is none of your business, we're going to have mercy here. Number 8, what happened in 1924 through 28? Mephibosheth went down to meet David as well, and he was kind of a mess. It says he hadn't trimmed his mustache or his toenails or anything since David left. B, the king asked Mephibosheth, why didn't you leave Jerusalem with me? Why didn't you come with me? And of course, Ziba had already told him an answer to that question. But here is where we find out that was a lie, or at least it appears to be based on this text that it was a lie. See, Mephibosheth tells David that Ziba betrayed him and slandered him. And he says that he recognizes that David was nothing but good to him when he didn't deserve it. So he says, you should have killed me. Anybody else would have killed everybody in his predecessor's house, but you didn't kill me. Instead, you sat me at your table. You've been nothing but good to me. I wanted to go with you, but Ziba betrayed me. And so that was his response. Number 9, how did David respond according to 1929? He said, why say more? I order you and Ziba divide the land. Now it's interesting because I I don't want to go too far on this, but um, David did not order Ziba put to death, and Mephibosheth restored to all of his stuff. Which, by the way, if Ziba had really lied, seems like the right thing to do. It seems like if this guy's lame and you took advantage of that to take everything that he had by lying to the king, then you should be put to death and everything given back to Mephibosheth, right? Um, so um, David didn't do that, and we don't know exactly why. Um, but perhaps it's because he has no way of knowing who's telling the truth. He said, who's telling the truth? You know what? Whatever it is, Ziba, if he lied, he's not going to really take care of Mephibosheth, so we need to divide it. If Mephibosheth is lying, then it doesn't feel right to take everything from Ziba. Mephibosheth seems to be the more believable person in this, and I think most of the commentaries would suggest that Ziba is the one that lied. From what I've read, from what I can see, it appears that Ziba is the one that lied. But when I look into the text and I see how David responded, um, he didn't respond as one that was confident that Ziba was the one that lied. He responded as one that has no way of knowing what really happened and has two guys telling him something that sounded believable. He definitely believes Ziba at the beginning. Now it seems like he believes Mephibosheth. So he says, you know what? Split it. And again, he said, why should anybody die today? He said that about Shimei. So he may be just in a gracious mood. We're just going to we're going to split this up. We're not, this is a day of celebration. This is not a day of punishment. That's not what we're going to do today. But it's interesting. And this is why and where I really think we begin to believe Mephibosheth over Ziba too, is in verse 30. Number 10 says, what did Mephibosheth say next according to 1930? In verse 30, Mephibosheth said to the king, let him take everything, now that my lord the king has returned home safely. So Mephibosheth says, you've been taking care of me. I don't need all that. What do I need that for? You've taken care of me. As long as you're here, I don't need all that. And so Mephibosheth does not seem to be worried about getting all his stuff back. Um, and then so Mephibosheth presents as the more believable character in this story. But honestly, um, these are things that we're kind of inferring from what information we have, and we don't know what really happened. And honestly, the truth is, too, going back to talking about leadership, David, you don't always know. You don't always know whether people are telling you the truth. People lie right to your face, and you think that you'll know if they're lying or not, but half the time you really don't know as well as you like to think you know. And does God give you discernment? Sure. Does God solve those problems for you? Yes. But sometimes you have to just respond in mercy because you're not sure, and mercy is the right answer anyway. Number 11, everyone seemed to want the honor of bringing the king back. Why was this such a big deal? So this is really an interesting thing. It is a big deal for them to come with the king across. So anybody who may not have been in favor with the king went right out there to make sure that they were the first to talk to the king and make sure that he didn't have time to get back in, decide, put them to death, whatever. So they came right out to be the ones that welcomed the king back. They wanted to be the ones that were with the king. So he's coming back into Jerusalem. He's coming back into Israel. Let's be let's be with the king when he comes back. Let's show that we're on his side. Who knows who else in Israel was really on his side? So everybody wanted to be seen on that day as the ones that were on the king's side, no matter whether they were on the king's side before, maybe they were kicking rocks, but they want to be today the ones that are seen as on the king's side. And so they're arguing about it. So Judah and Benjamin, by the way, Judah and Benjamin, the two tribes that ultimately under Solomon's son and the other person in the court were separated. Judah and Benjamin were the two tribes, the 10 tribes. So Judah and Benjamin come out, they're with David, and then the rest of Israel comes down and says, hey, why are you bringing him back? And Judah says, we're his family. Why would we bring him back? And the rest of Israel says, we've got 10 shares in the king. So in other words, there's 12 tribes. We're 10 of them. We should bring him back. We got 10 shares. He's Israel's king, not just Judah's king. And we got 10 shares in the king. So that's a reference to the 10 tribes that were not apparently included. Shimei brought 1,000 Benjamite soldiers and all of Judah came down. But what about the rest of the tribes? Why aren't we in? And this is a big deal. And honestly, in some ways, it is a big deal to be seen as with the king on this day. But doesn't it sound like children fighting when they start arguing over this? And I had to chuckle about their argument about who has more share in the king on this day. After really all of them, anybody that didn't go out with David, so anybody that's not now coming back in with him, stayed in Israel under Absalom, and in some way was complicit in this rebellion. If they weren't active in the rebellion, they were complicit. They were a part of it. The people that went out with David were the people that weren't going to be a part of it. So everybody that came out to meet them were people that were ultimately not on his side in the battle. But now today they're coming out to be on his side and to walk in with the people that were on his side. So now there's an argument. We didn't need any of his provisions. This is not like we came out to, but here's the deal, is he's handing out this one guy that supported him, Barzillai. He's handing out space in his court, taking care of him to people that supported him, and they all want a part of that. So they're all going out. We want to be a part of this new kingdom. We want to be a part of your kingdom now. They want to be the closest to him. And it's really like children fighting over who is going to be the favorite and who's going to get a piece of, and they quickly swapped, didn't they? And this is the way so many people are. When things are going your way, they come out, they want to be with you. When things are not going your way, they're not with you. So the people that went with David are the ones that were really with him. And now these other people want to also be seen as with him, even though they really weren't. But then we get to David. None of that matters to David. Today is a day of reconciliation, reunification. I'm thinking about, our own American Civil War. I'm thinking about the end of World War II. I'm thinking about how we end wars and how we tend to try to make sure that the losers of the wars are punished versus what would be best. As I understand it, my history is a little rusty, but as I understand the American Civil War, it's widely believed that Reconstruction of the South would have gone very differently if Abraham Lincoln had not been assassinated, because his take on how we were going to restore things was very different than what ended up happening under his successor. So David is being This sounds funny, more Abraham Lincoln like, or perhaps Abraham Lincoln learned something from the story of David. But he says nobody's going to be punished today. This is not about, we can fight for justice and punish everybody that did wrong, or we can just call it even. Let's start again. Let's get this right this time. And that's what it looks to me like David is doing. Um, and I don't think they have to worry about who brings David in with a leader like David. If they had a different kind of leader, then it might matter whether they were seen as with him and went out to be with him. But with David, I don't think it matters whether they come. He's not trying to show favorites here. He's trying to restore the kingdom. And we can learn a lot from his leadership, I think. So it's good to study God's word with you.